Well, hello everybody. I am in the car, and we've got a lot of time on our hands because we're driving from Tatev to Yerevan in Armenia. Beautiful drive, beautiful weather. But I decided to take the opportunity because I'm with Dr. Mark Musser, and I want to ask him some questions. So I'm going to turn the camera to him. It's going to be on him pretty much the entire time. And I'm going to, so Mark, I want to ask you some questions about the Christian or biblical worldview of conservationism as opposed to this idea of environmentalism. And you've written a book called Nazi Ecology, which you do write extensively about this subject, but to make it kind of easier for people that just don't read anymore. So I'd like for you to talk about this. What's the biblical worldview of conservationism?
Well, in the Garden of Eden, initially when God created man in his image, which is very important, God is transcendent. He creates a world that's outside of himself, and then he makes man in his image, as it says in our image, as we know from the Trinity, we know that to be the case. And so that man reflects God in very important ways. His body reflects, body parts even reflect, something of the glory of God. And one of the reasons, or one of the aspects of that, would be rulership, and also to be outside of something, in the sense that we are transcendent above nature in the same way that God transcendently made the universe. He's above it. And so we share something of God's glory in the sense that we are above the creation that he made. Yes, it is true, we are part of nature, but still, because we are made in God's image, we are above it. And this is God's plan. We were to rule over nature. That was the original plan. God says to rule, to subdue and fill the earth. And today we rule over people, and that's really not God's original plan per se. God's original plan was for us to rule over nature. And after God made man in his image, he planted a garden, a beautiful garden. And animals, I can tell you right now, they love gardens. So when Adam was in the garden and God placed him there, he named all the animals. I'm a farmer, and I can tell you that the animals love farms more than they love the wilderness. I can tell you that right now, because it's wonderful life on the farm. We have lots of problems with animals on our farm. I'm from Olympia, Washington, and we have a big herd of elk that rip through our farm frequently, and it's actually a big problem. But still, God has made us in his image, and the original plan of God was for man, when he said subdue and fill the earth. Okay, he just planted a garden. The original plan was for man to turn the wilderness into a garden. And so this is what we see in the opening verses of Genesis. And that requires hard work. Of course, it wouldn't be like with blood, sweat, and tears like we know after the fall, but still there was an expectation. Man was to work. Marriage was initially provided for what purpose? To populate the earth through marriage and procreation, to subdue and fill it, to spread out and turn the entire wilderness of this world into a garden. And everyone would be happy, including the animals, because they like farms better than they do the wilderness. And so this was God's original plan for mankind.
That's great. So
that's
the conservationism.
Yes, that's the conservationism.
I see.
Yes.
And so just before we get into the environmentalism, how do Christian conservationists practice today according to their biblical worldview? So if you believe this biblical worldview, made in the image of God, and that we have this creation cultural mandate given in Genesis, what would what should a Christian do when it comes to conservationism today in modern terms in the 21st century?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that when we talk about conservationism, I think the original plan this was God's plan. Farming, the world, okay, according to the perfect environment, okay. The sad thing is that's now lost to us, okay? And so now when we want to conserve or farm, okay, the world, there's lots of problems connected to that. And God promises that, he uses nature, the ground specifically, which is cursed, to discipline us. And so now when we try to practice our farming, which we have to use to live on, that becomes a big problem, so that weeds are now more prolific than the good plants that we need and must nurture in order to survive. And so now nature, works against us. Maybe not completely, but to some extent it works against us to discipline us, because this has been, what God has decided. Nature is now cursed. The ground is cursed. We have to work with the soil in order to live, and so that introduces lots of problems. And one of those problems, which is also hard for us to accept, but it's actually true, is that now in the fallen world, for man to survive, nature must be sacrificed for the well-being of man. And so we see this right away after the Garden of Eden. They're removed from the Garden of Eden. The paradise is lost. And now Adam and Eve, they begin what we call animal sacrifices, looking forward to the coming Messiah, who will be the one who will subdue and fill the earth properly through his coming plans of God's overall kingdom program for the entire history. Okay, and that will finally be fulfilled at the end of the day. But in between, we have lots of troubles and problems, and God promises that. And one of the things that is connected to that is the sacrifice of nature for man's well-being. And how far you take that is another problem, okay? Because, of course, with our commercial world, even with our Soviet world, our communist world, socialist world, we still sacrifice nature for man's well-being, even though they don't like to admit it, but that's what happens. How far do you take that is sort of the problem that we face in our world today. And I can say as a farmer that, there's only so much you can do because of the situation, the world we live in, it's fallen. But we still work hard. We have a beautiful farm. We do not try to pollute the environment, but some of it is necessary, okay? In order to live, you have to eat. And when you eat, you have to go to the bathroom, okay? You've got animals do the same, okay? It's part of the cycles of nature. And yet today, bacterias, things like that are probably the biggest problems you actually face in nature. They're actually worse than the chemicals sometimes. A lot of people don't realize that, but it's true. And if you have sort of an organic nature that is not, it's all based on the cursed ground. So a lot of people today, they're trying to get back to nature, get back to purity. And so they think that let's get back to that which is most natural and this will be pure. But the problem is God has cursed that ground. And all the organic things that we see from the ground are actually the very things that are not pure. And in the sense that, we can eat it, of course, and God has it, but at the end of the day, our bodies are mortal, and the food we eat is based on a ground that's cursed, and so it's going to eventually do us in.
So this opens up two questions for me.
Right.
One has to do with the vegans. Then the other one has to do with environmentalism. It seems like they're both together.
Right.
I mean, the way you're describing it. Before we get to this vegan thing, because that's going to be another rabbit trail, I want to go into environmentalism. What is environmentalism? How is that opposed or different than biblical conservatism? And can you deconstruct and show why environmentalism is actually destructive?
Well, environmentalism is where man is sacrificed for nature. Okay, in the biblical worldview, conservationism, okay, nature is sacrificed for the well-being of man. But in order for the well-being of man to continue, the sacrifice has to be done with wisdom. And you have to take care of things. But yet, there must be some sacrifice must be made for man to survive. And so this is something we see throughout the scriptures, actually from the fall up until the end. And even in for example, the book of Genesis, you have the book of Deuteronomy in the law, the fifth book of Moses. You have God says, "I've given you the earth, okay, even to mine, okay, and given you a mind." He's given them property which they can use to try to find things and look for things, and He will bless obedience to His will, which is the most important thing. God will, when people obey Him by faith, then He will bless them in the land. This is promised, in the Old Testament. The problem is that we don't obey God, and so the cursed ground becomes a bigger curse against us because of our disobedience to God. And He always disciplines sin, regardless of what's going on. So environmentalism became a big problem, actually, in the Old Testament. We call it nature worship. It was connected to idolatry. And idolatry, really, what you do is that you worship materialism in some form. And in the ancient world, you had a mixture of nature worship, that's the material world, and then you idolize that. And of course, a lot of times it was made in some man-made figure. And what's interesting is that if there's no transcendent God who stands above us as our Savior, as our judge, as our creator, then what happens in nature is that man becomes the highest creature, because obviously man is that highest creature, and he becomes a god. And then you worship nature and man at the same time. And this really plagued the history of the entire Old Testament.
So that's kind of the roots of it is going back to breaking God's commandments,
Right.
basically. Don't have another God before me,
Yes.
and all those things. So today, when we hear the word environmentalism, you have people going, "Oh, it's just good. We're trying to protect the water. We're trying to protect the air. We're trying to protect this or that. What's wrong with that?" Well, how would you answer something like that if folks are looking at it from an environmental perspective?
Well, again, going back to the Old Testament, the ancient fertility cults, okay, this would be Baalism especially, is that the whole point was that you were to sacrifice man for the well-being of nature. And then at the same time, yet you also had this kind of a wild attitude about sex and what you would call things that are, not kosher. I mean, with regard to sexual practices and marriage and family and all the things that are not right with regard to the sexual revolution that we see today in our own world. So that on the one hand, they're going to beat themselves up in order to preserve nature, sacrifice themselves. They actually did human sacrifice too in the Old Testament. They were involved with very strange activities in order to fertilize nature. A lot of times they would do these fertility cults, and they would practice they would offer sacrifices up on the hills, the high hills. They would do this underneath the oak trees a lot of times because the oak trees stood for strength. A lot of times they would even they would actually practice sexual activities that were forbidden by the Old Testament. Male prostitution, cult prostitution, and they used that to fertilize nature for their gardens.
Okay, wait, you've opened up a huge can of worms. I got 3 subjects going on here, and they all seem like they're intertwined.
Yes.
So we've got going against God's design for sex, which
Right.
was designed for a man and a woman.
Fertility.
Yeah, and then you have this whole kind of veganism,
Right.
in a sense, and then you have environmentalism. So they're all connected somehow, is what you're saying.
Right. So, I mean, my view is that environmentalism is like an ancient fertility cult. Basically brought up to date in our world, and a lot of people are fooled by the ancient fertility cult of the past, because that was true in Israel too. If you look at their history, a lot of people were fooled by the Baalism. They did not know the difference between the worship of God and the worship of Baal. A lot of times the words were the same. Okay, God is the Lord. Okay, Baal is the Lord.
Yeah, and Hosea 2:70 says, "I'm going to remove Baal from your mouths."
So you have this right. You have this problem with regard to how people viewed nature, God, the gods, man, and these problems are still with us today. Who is man? Who is God? How do I relate to the created world in which I live in? And this is always the problem. Even in the original creation, God says, "Subdue and fill the earth." That word "subdue" is very strong, because man is to be a ruler. Of course, in the world that is not fallen, you can rule and subdue it, and nature will be more able to handle it. Okay, without maybe some of the pollution problems we see today. But now, when you subdue and fill the earth, okay, you're going to have lots of troubles connected to that, and it's almost like a situation where things get out of control, and then people want to clean things up because they see all the problems. But the great concern is that people leave God out of the equation.
This is just thinking about this. It seems like this is also tied to the Bill Gates, we're overpopulating the earth. We got to depopulate because we're because of environmentalism. It seems like it goes back to this subject. I know there's other factors, obviously, in worldview, that Bill Gates wouldn't look at any human being created in the image of the triune God and wouldn't look at them as intrinsically value. But it seems like it's all kind of going back into this subject. What do you think about that?
Well, through transhumanism, they want to they deny we're made in God's image, and yet they want to somehow get there through transhumanism, and then they also want to get back to nature to make us pure all at the same time. Okay, and it's like the Garden of Eden. Somehow, whatever happened there historically in the past is still somehow in our DNA, somehow in our psyche.
This is our new Babel,
Yeah,
Babel
right.
kind of deal.
Okay, and it's still there, and that
Yeah.
memory of that is still with us in some spiritual way that we don't quite understand. And so people want to go back to it. Well, how do you go back to it? Well, there has to be some progressive way to get there, okay, because the world we live in now is really not there, so we have to somehow progress to get back to the Garden of Eden, to get back to purity. So these are actually contradictions, but our world is full of them.
Yeah.
And the transhumanism is a big part of environmentalism. And what they say is there's too many people, and what we have to do is, basically transhumanism is a new form of eugenics. Okay, it actually makes what the Nazis did in the past look very primitive compared to what they have now, compared to what we see in the 1930s. And it's mixing with environmentalism, and they want to worship nature and worship man at the same time, and bring us back to some utopia like the Garden of Eden that will be in the progressive future, in a world that is not populated by too many people.
So I want to, just from your perspective, can you name a couple examples going on in the 20th or the 21st century, examples of environmentalism that has been just done the opposite? It hasn't helped anything. In fact, it's hurt things. But then people just kind of brush over it and they don't talk about it. And if you have any examples.
Well, I'll just give you one example
Okay.
from the early 20th century, then we can talk about more modern ones.
Okay.
Is that Teddy Roosevelt was what you call he was a president, 26th president of the United States, and he was what we call a conservationist. And he grew up in a Christian worldview. He loved nature, okay, and he was a hunter, okay. But yet he wanted to preserve things in a good way, conserve things. So, for example, during his administration, during the early 1900s, I think it's like we're talking 1905. You have to, the exact dates. It's been a while since I've looked at this, but California was, people were moving to California even back then, okay, and they needed water, and there became a big environmental conservationist debate between how are we going to give water to the people of California moving in there. And there was a debate about a special valley in the Sierra Nevada called the Hetchy Valley. And this is like it's a beautiful valley. And they wanted to build a dam from the rivers coming out of the Sierra in order to provide water for, that area of California. And what you have is John Muir, okay, he was an environmentalist, and he believed in transcendentalism, where man was above kind of a man, and nature is sort of above things, but not in a way that we see from the Old Testament, where God has made his man's image and therefore he is to rule over nature. He actually is going to subvert that, and he fought these people to build a dam to protect the water that is necessary to build California. And so a big environmental debate, conservationist debate, occurred between John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt won, and they built a dam, and that helped to develop what we used to call the Golden State of California. And so Teddy Roosevelt, despite his love for nature, despite his desire to have national forests and all those types of things, at the end of the day, Teddy Roosevelt decided we have to take care of people.
Okay.
People are moving to California, and we are going to build that dam, and that dam is going to provide them with the necessary water. John Muir, the environmentalists, were against that. Okay.
So if we're in the year 2025, like we are right now, and the same decision was going to be made, how would it go in California?
Oh, today it's environmentalism. They're tearing down dams today. Okay, they are taking the infrastructure that Teddy Roosevelt and later on Franklin Roosevelt built for our country. They want to tear it all down because they think that leads to pollution. It leads to the killing of fish. There was a big discussion. I mean, I haven't read all the reports, but part of the problem with the water during the fires, for example, in Hollywood, back, the northern northern Hollywood, in northern Los Angeles,
Right.
I forget the name of the city now.
Yeah, it was all, the whole,
But anyway,
LA, northern.
they didn't have the water they needed, and
That's
a part
right.
of the problem is because of their environmental rules that prevented them from having water. Okay.
So there's a clear example
Yes.
of how environmentalism literally destroys and kills.
Yes. And this is really part of the problem, but they don't mind that because, and at least not yet, because they think there's too many people and that the planet is too developed, and they don't want to see more cities, more people. That they think this is what's causing the problem. So the original sin for them is too many people. But think about this. I mean, you go back to the Garden of Eden. This was the original command: subdue and fill the earth.
Right.
And you subdue and fill the earth through what? Through marriage and procreation. And that was God's original design. And that law, that command, has never been rescinded. It's still with us today.
Correct.
Even in the fallen world, it doesn't matter. That command still is with us, and people are required to fulfill it. If they don't do it, there's going to be divine discipline. And the things that we're seeing in our world today with regard to environmentalism, that this is a form of divine discipline against America, for example, as people continue to walk away from God's original design for the human race. And now we see the environmental movement taking over our country, especially in places like the West Coast, where, even the entire West, if you really think about it, the environmentalists are in control of all the national forests today.
So what would
And
be
the national forests are huge. Okay, they actually circumvent states' rights.
Wow.
Originally, all of the state land, the land was supposed to all go to the states, and it was supposed to be under their protection, under their rights, under their development. And if a state wanted to set aside a national park, that's fine, or a state park. This is what we see in Adirondack National Park, State Park in New York. Okay, now there's lots of rules and regulations there now too, but still there's cities there inside that park. And there's some things that could be done more like Switzerland, okay, for example, where nature and man are sort of together a little bit better. But yet, man is still above nature. You can't deny that. So now we have millions of acres throughout the entire West in which the national government owns that property. And very little is being done with that property today. And it's not being taken care of. The idea that wilderness takes care of itself and that nature is pure, this is a false idea. This goes against God's original plan.
Oh, I want to ask a practical question. If there was if Donald Trump was listening to this conversation, he's like, you know what, this is right. How in the world, what should he do to change this? I mean, what would an American do? Say, I want to live according to a biblical worldview for my country, so we can take care of nature better and subdue it better. What would you suggest?
Well, the most important thing, you have to deregulate, and you have to provide responsibility and freedom. Freedom means responsibility. Okay, this is a false idea that people have, which is why we're losing our freedoms. They don't understand that freedom means responsibility, and when you have private property, the freedom of private property, that requires responsibility to take care of. Okay, if you look at really what's going on, when people have private property, they take care of stuff. They take care, we take care of our farm, okay? We do so very seriously. We take it seriously because it's ours. When it's not, doesn't belong to somebody. If it's public property, nobody takes care of it. And there's even pictures you can see of old forests, okay, versus new forests that are grown under private property. And you can see the difference. The forests actually on private property are more healthy than the forests that are basically in the wilderness.
Kind of left to themselves.
Left to themselves.
Yeah, they're
okay,
wild.
The bugs take over. Okay, if you walk, people look at me
You're right,
strange. Diseases are there. Okay,
right.
I can tell you right now. I go into Washington State Forest and I love nature. I've hiked many mountains in the state of Washington. It's the Switzerland of America, especially the North Cascades. I've been in many places. But if you go in any forest in Washington State, there's probably more trees on the ground, dead, dying, full of bugs, than actually growing out of them.
You know, I noticed that in California. I was driving through
they're
state
everywhere.
parks there,
Okay.
and I saw the same thing. Absolutely saw the same
So
thing.
even the so-called virgin forest is full of death. Okay, and people don't get that. You're walking over a graveyard of trees, and those trees become, I know they provide benefit in the sense you've got some. this is how the planet is with regard to there's good fertilizer and the things that when things get rotten, the bugs do their job, but also the bugs also create lots of damage. And right now, in many places of the West, for example, the bugs are taking over trees, turning them brown, turning the leaves brown. I saw this all over Colorado. You see this in different places of Wyoming and Montana today. It's in Washington State a little bit, where entire forest areas are now turning brown because of these bugs.
So you would say deregulate and open these things
Yes,
up for
right.
private ownership,
Right,
is what you're
exactly.
saying. So
Yes.
then every person will take care, or company will
They'll
take
do
care
a
of
better
that
job.
property.
Yes.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, that's biblical.
So we're not logging anymore,
Right,
okay?
right.
And what's happening is now we give it to the bugs, and then the bugs turn they turn everything brown, and then the fires come in and burn it all down.
Right.
Okay, this is just foolishness. And also roads. Okay, we are taking away roads. They block off the roads, and so you can't drive up there and put out a fire if it shows up. Okay, you have no chance of getting there because you can't get vehicles in there. Okay, so they're cutting off all the roads. And so when you have a fire, out there in the wilderness, you can't get to it, and the roads don't last. So if you close off a road within about 3-4 years, that road is already in deep trouble. 10 years, it's basically gone, and you have to take care of them.
Do you have just one more before I get to the bombshell? What is the most, I would say, another example for the 21st century about that you've seen that environmentalism has really caused great harm? Either in America, Europe, around the world, wherever
There's lots of examples.
Yeah.
Okay, I believe today the environmental movement is actually more worse for nature than better.
Sure.
For a lot of reasons. And for example, at the beginning they did some things that were fine. I mean, but this is when things it wasn't all that regulated. You had some good rules. Okay, like everything, you have to have some good rules. But in anything in life, okay, if you multiply rules, okay, or you multiply anything, there's always a law of what we call the diminishing returns. And so what's going to happen, the more laws you have, the more regulations we have, which are now super abundant in the environmental movement, the more expensive they become and the less you're going to get out of them. And actually, at the end of the day, you're going to create more harm than good. So, for example, when I was a kid, I remember 1980s, there was this terrible oil spill in Alaska, the Gulf of Alaska. And,
I remember.
It was the Exxon
I remember
Valdez,
that, yeah.
and the oil went all over that area, Valdez, and it created a big, environmental nightmare. However, within a few years, it washed up and cleaned up pretty good. They don't really talk about that, but I mean, that's nature seems to have its own ability to clean things up. God made this world, and He made it relatively robust, much more robust than we think it is. It's not as fragile as a lot of people have been basically sold. Because see, the reason why they teach that nature is fragile today is because they believe in evolution.
Yeah.
Okay, and so what happens is we live like on the knife edge of what you would call, there's a special word for it, between life and death. But they have it's like a knife edge you walk on. And so nature is fragile in their minds. And so we have to really protect nature because it's so fragile, because they look at the universe, death is everywhere abundant, and life is very, right on the edge. Okay. But that knife edge that we see in our world and experience is evidence that God is the creator, and that He has actually made a world despite the knife edge, despite all the death we see around us. There is a world we can live in, and God is the creator that did that, and He is going to make a world that is relatively robust, despite the fact that today it's fallen. So the reason why all these rules and regulations are there is because of the false doctrine of evolution. They think that things have slowly evolved over time and there's no creator, and mankind, the population explosion has gotten out of control so fast, so big, that the world cannot handle it. Okay, and the knife edge of life now, they're scared because we're going to die. So they have all these rules and regulations.
So going back to the Alaska oil spill, where nobody talked about how nature cleaned itself through the mechanisms God's created. You were saying there was some environment, there was connection to something that you noticed about how environmentalism actually really damaged this doctrine and the practice of it.
Well, now we'll get to talk about
Okay.
something very interesting that's
Okay.
happened within the last number of 10 years ago.
Okay.
I don't remember the exact year. I think this is probably back longer. Time flies by so quickly. But Obama was the president.
Okay.
And the EPA had new rules for, like they do always, okay, for gold mines and other mining activities. And this goes back to actually stormwater rules that preceded the global warming concerns and carbon dioxide. And this is the early 2000s, late 90s. They started to really get serious about erosion control, how to clean up water that comes off of any job site. It doesn't matter if it's you're building homes or any kind of industrial site or even mining. Okay. So they've introduced all kinds of rules and regulations to clean everything up. So when you build a house, okay, you have to build a house in such a way that whatever runoff is either before the building or even afterwards, it's going to be minimized as much as possible with regard to either pollution or erosion.
So why is the runoff a problem, though? I mean, like
Well,
for a
I
normal person, like say, who cares? It's water. It's just going
Right.
down the street. Like, what's the problem there? Why
Well,
would they?
the idea is water hits your roof
Okay.
and it goes down a gutter, and then it hits your patio. It picks up pollution underneath your car, where you got gas and oil, or maybe pesticides you're using to have a nice lawn. Okay, things like this, and then that washes off into the gutter system, the ditches. Okay, from the gutters to the ditches through your property, and then it starts to pollute the entire environment. Plus, the volume of water is high coming off your property that wouldn't normally be there because the roof, okay, it's flat, not flat, but it's sloped, and it picks up all that water, and then that water has to go anywhere, and the water's never filtrated by the natural ground. So they're concerned about that. Too much water picking up pollution goes into the system, and of course it goes across pavement, roads, parking lots especially, and then all that water rushes into the river systems really fast and creates lots of erosion. So that they're worried about that.
All right. There we go.
And so it doesn't matter if you build a piece of property, a house, or a commercial, industrial site, a parking lot, a shopping mall, or even do something up in the mountains like do some mining. So a number of years ago, they had new laws connected to mining. And there was there's a gold mine that was kind of shut down up in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. And I forget the name of the river where this took place, but eventually that river system feeds into the main Colorado River system. It gets into the drinking water eventually in Arizona, where that's very important for Lake Havasu. All that.
Oh,
Okay.
how about interesting? Huh.
And-
Is this where I heard that, like it made the water turn red or orange?
Yes, that's it.
I remember when this happened.
Yeah.
Please tell the story.
Well, the EPA did that. It was not the gold miner that did it. It was EPA that did that, and they did it because of their rules. And what happened is that they made some new rules where, by law, they had to clean up your mining operations, whether it's gold or whatever, in different ways that were never required before. So this particular gold mine, that it was pretty much, it was already done. It was not being used. It was not being mined at the time. It was already being kind of set aside. But the new laws required you had to do some extra things to clean things up. So by law, they were required to clean it up. Now, the man that was in charge of that gold mine, he said, you won't, what you want to do, this is not a good idea. Okay, let's just leave it. Okay, if you do what you're doing now, it's going to create a lot of problems. But by law, they had to do it. Okay, and so what they did, they drilled a hole, into this gold mine, previous gold mine, and they drilled too low, and it hit a water vein, that was there, and mountains are full of water, even on the inside, and so they hit a water vein, and what happened was unbelievable. The water gushed out, and it just rushed out of that mountain, mixed in with all kinds of different ores and minerals from that mountain, and created the biggest ecological disaster on the continent, not like an oil spill out at sea, but the biggest ecological disaster in the history of our country occurred right there. And it all went to the river system. It turned the river system around that area for miles and miles and miles. It turned it orange. very little was discussed about this. And it was the EPA that did that. It was not the miners that did that. And it was their new rules that they introduced in order to clean things up. It actually did the opposite. And this is what it goes back to what I just said. If you have too many laws, too many rules, at some point you're going to have the law of diminishing returns. And if you have too many rules, then what's going to happen? You're going to do worse things for the environment than better. You're going to start going backwards. And that is one example of what happens when you overregulate.
So, all right, the one thing I want to get to is, this is kind of important, is it's from your book, Nazi Ecology, and your studies in this, you kind of go back to this whole environmentalism, this veganism, this whole thing we've been talking about goes back to the Nazi socialist agenda, correct? The National Party's agenda. Is that correct? Can you explain that a little bit so we can see the connection?
There's a history. It's connected, because in the older days, back in the 1700s, the 1800s, what you have is sort of a mixture of what we call the Romantic movement with Christianity and Judeo-Christian values. And the Romanticism is a kind of a romance with nature. You love nature. God made it. We enjoy it because God made it. Yet there's kind of a nature mysticism with it too that's not biblical, but still it was not too bad because they still had something of the Genesis account.
So what time period
God
are you
is the
talking
creator.
about right now?
This is back in the 1700s, 1800s.
So with this, like when Jonathan Edwards is talking about different things in nature and doing theological treatises. Okay, all right. Good. All right.
So you had this worldview that was kind of mixing. It was mainly dominated by the Judeo-Christian worldview, but you had this little mixture of romanticism mixed in with it, where man has a mystical communion with nature. He has a sort of a communion with God through nature rather than the Bible, rather than through church.
Got it.
Part of the problem that a lot of Christians don't think about, and even a lot of our other people don't think about too, is that the church had become corrupted by a number of things, whether it be the Catholicism, the legalism of the church, or even the state churches. They're infected with liberal ideology that started to develop at this time, and so these things are kind of fomenting at the time. And the Romanticism became an important truth, and people wanted to get back to nature. But they believed still that God was a creator in those days. It's before evolution, it's before Darwinism. So at least there was some sense of respect for God as the creator. But as time goes on, and what a lot of people don't realize is that, yes, Darwin, England had its own romantic movement. In Germany, it was stronger. And a lot of ideas that Darwin had really goes back to Germany. And he loved, for example, Goethe was one of his favorite philosophers.
So it's not the other way around.
Yes.
I kind of always thought it was Darwin that kind of influenced.
I'm trying to correct people on this. They ignore me. They don't listen to me.
Fascinating.
But that's the story of my life.
Well, we're listening now.
Yeah, right. And a lot of people get mad at me. But anyway, so Darwin liked that romanticism. And he's going to convert that romanticism into an evolutionism. And a lot of that goes back to Goethe, who was really the father of what we call German romanticism today. And he was much more negative against the Judeo-Christian worldview. And for example, there's a quote where he says, had our culture had Homer rather than Moses as a basis for our country, we would be so much better off. And Goethe was a lover of nature. He was, he loved to go hiking. He had a favorite oak tree he used to sit underneath. He was inspired by, the natural world around him. And so a lot of the things he was looking at was very important to him from a more naturalistic perspective, but it was a romantic view of the world. He was especially interested in colors, because the nature is so beautiful with all the different colors and how that relates to the eye. He had some, romantic ideas about that. And so Goethe, the other person probably more important than Goethe, was a man called Alexander Humboldt, And basically, I believe, it's been a while since I've looked at this now, but I think he is one of the original founders of Berlin University. I believe that Humboldt was the one who brought Hegel into the university system of Berlin. And I believe also the other one in Humboldt brought Schleiermacher. Schleiermacher, I don't say him correctly, but
Schleiermacher,
yes,
might say
he's going to be the theological
Yep.
romantic,
Yep.
where he's going to take Goethe's more naturalistic romanticism. He's going to Christianize it and bring it into the church in Germany. And so Humboldt was a man that went on a 5-year voyage. And don't think about Star Trek. Forgive me. Okay, he goes on a 5-year voyage, and he goes to South America, Central America, and he
Can
does.
you give us approximate dates?
Yeah, it's like in the it's like the late 1700s,
Okay.
early
All right.
1800s. Okay, I don't know the exact
That's
dates.
fine.
I want to say
Approximate.
it's like the late 1700s. I can't remember the exact dates, but in that time
Perhaps we
period.
keep my bearings on the timeline. Okay.
And he will become like really the first naturalist. He's going to become the father of modern geography from a more what you would call a naturalistic point of view. And he's going to go start looking at things from sort of a naturalistic point of view without God. And by naturalism, I mean a world explained to us apart from the transcendence of God. And this is going to become his hobby, okay, his love, the basis for modern teaching, university, okay, and he will bring this to Berlin University. And so he was on a voyage, and he's checking out nature in its natural sense without man. And of course, in Europe basically it was a big farm. Okay, by the time that he lived, Germany was just a big farm, and he goes to the wild nature of South America. Notice the big difference, Central America. Notices the big difference. Of course, it wasn't known as that back then. And then he wants to show that contrast. Okay. He also makes the big contrast between how the height elevation, and then also you can do that with regard to the planet. It's the farther south you go, the warmer it gets, and then the farther north you go, the colder it gets. Of course, it goes vice versa toward the bottom of the poles. But he showed all that, and that kind of reflects what we see in the mountains. As the higher you go, the colder it gets, the lower you go, so he kind of had some very interesting things to say about geography. Well, Darwin loved him, and so when Darwin goes on the Beagle, he is trying to reproduce what Humboldt did.
Interesting.
Okay, and so this is really the inspiration for Darwin to go on his own voyage of the Beagle. And so when he goes on his Beagle, this is going to be his own voyage to really set in stone, so to speak, his environmental and evolutionist worldview now. So his environmentalism now, his romanticism and naturalism working together without God, that's going to become the basis for environmentalism. This will now mix with his evolutionary worldview point. And then, of course, later on, this will become the basis for social Darwinism, and this is where Germany comes into the fore. That becomes so very important with regard to why National Socialism, social Darwinism becomes such a big thing, and how, which a lot of people don't know, it mixed with ecology. So what happens after...
So I just want to ask, to get context for some certain listeners that are younger.
Yeah.
They refer to the leader of the party as Mustache Man now. That's what he's known as, Mustache Man.
I see.
All right.
Okay.
So how did Mustache Man... where did he get this? I mean, he studied to be an artist. He was a painter.
He was a romantic.
And so
He
is
loved
this kind of
romantic paintings.
did he have other advisors that kind of pushed this agenda, or just, wherever you want to go with that? I'm just curious about that.
Well, National Socialism in the 1930s actually is the bridge between what we would call a more Judeo-Christian conservationism versus modern environmentalism, even postmodern environmentalism.
How interesting.
That they are really the first country in the world to politically put into practice environmental principles. It's kind of, it's like on the way between conservationism and environmentalism. So some of these things are mixed in together at that time. But they are the political bridge between them. And before National Socialism, you have this mixture of, Romanticism, naturalism, Judeo-Christian worldview, God is the creator. But now after Darwin, God is not necessary really. God sort of becomes pantheistic in the sense that God is everything now. Nature evolves. Well, how does nature evolve? Well, God is working through nature to evolve it. And so that now nature sort of kind of becomes its own God, because nature produces itself, evolves itself based on its own laws of natural selection and this type of stuff, the survival of the fittest, those things working together to produce a world that we live in today over millions of years over time. And then what happens in Germany is that a man named Ernst Haeckel, he's going to take over that Darwinian program and turn this into social Darwinism, biology, and ecology. And his league that he established in the late 1800s is called the Monist League, which is monism. And by monism, we mean nature alone without any God. God might be nature, maybe, but for the most part, there is no transcendent God on the outside who is our ruler.
Well, this sounds like the New Agers today.
Yes,
Yeah.
and he really becomes, and he's going to mix science, evolutionism, naturalism, the Humboldt science, Goethe's science, naturalism, romanticism, all into a monistic one, And he's going to be the man that will really open the door for eugenics. I know Francis Galton, this is going to be, of course it's going to be, Darwin's, I think it's cousin or uncle, I can't remember. I think it's his cousin. He's going to be sort of the main father of what you would call eugenics. However, Haeckel's going to take it more seriously because he wants to really put it into practice. In England, there was more of a hesitancy to bring about social Darwinism because with England, they're more of a they're more empirically minded. They're more interested in what actually works. In the sense they look at the real world we live in. They take it more seriously. In Germany, they're more idealist. And this goes back to.
But it's interesting. I just mentioned that. I was thinking about their ideology led to eugenics, which led to what was called the T4 program, if I remember.
Well, right.
Was that? So I mean, they're literally. I mean, so they decided to experiment to the destruction of human life.
Right.
What are some of the things because of this weird environmentalism, this whatever Darwinistic Haeckel, whatever.
Yeah, nature alone.
Yeah, how did this?
There's no God.
How did this go to let's murder children with Down syndrome? How did they go from that to that? And then what are some of the other things that you would say were destructive that we can tell that came out of that? I mean, obviously, well, maybe the environmental examples you gave us already.
Yeah.
I mean, from the United States, but is a fruit of this ideology, maybe. But
Sure.
Can you give some examples of that, maybe?
Well, with Haeckel, he's going to take this social Darwinism and mix it with survival of the fittest, but he's also going to develop biology and ecology. So he was one of the first politically, motivated environmentalists of his day. And Haeckel was not necessarily anti-Semitic, but he was anti-Christian. So Haeckel did not like the church, and he thought that the church was actually causing problems with nature because of its worldview relative to Genesis. Genesis chapter 1, God has made his man's image, he's above nature. And he believed that Genesis chapter 1 was actually what's causing the ecological problems of our world because man is above nature, he's therefore abusing nature.
So he actually stated it.
Yes.
This clearly.
Right.
Oh, interesting.
Now, that idea he got from Schopenhauer. And Schopenhauer is a little bit earlier, and he really is a father of what we call the existentialist movement. And he was also an environmentalist. Now, Romanticism is almost the same as existentialism. And what's going on here is that existentialism emphasizes the will, in nature. And with the Romanticism, it emphasizes feelings. So I feel good in nature. I feel good by looking at the beautiful world I live in. And there's a natural feeling there that makes me feel good, and I want that. And it becomes religious. So this is romanticism. Okay, Schopenhauer is more pessimistic, okay, because he looks at the world. The world is in a mess. And what is the problem of the world? It's all about will. And so animals have will. Everything, man has will. And that will is what makes the world work as it is that we see. And so he wrote a book called The World as Will and Representation. And this goes back to, he's trying to say that idealism, which is this idealistic view that the Germans really had, very strong in their philosophical history. They have an idealistic worldview. Well, he's going to sort of tone it down with will, so it doesn't become too idealistic, okay? And he was really very anti-Semitic. He hated the Jews. And he specifically said that Genesis chapter 1, the Jewish worldview must be exterminated from Europe.
Wow.
And he also said that animal cruelty comes from the Jews.
Wow. Oh,
okay,
my goodness.
and he had big discussions about this in his philosophical writings.
That conclusion.
Because of Genesis
Wow.
1. Adam
Wow.
names the animals. This gives him the right to treat the animals badly and harshly.
Oh my goodness.
And so that becomes
what an ignorant man.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
This is a cursory view of history.
And
But anyway,
Schopenhauer
let's move on.
really is the father of environmental ethics. And by existence, existentialism, I mean the existential world we live in. Pure existence without God. So you mix that with romanticism, okay? You mix that with social Darwinism, right? The will, man, the survival of the fittest, nature, the wild animals, okay? The bears, the predators, the wolves versus the deer and the elk and the moose, okay, and the rabbits. Okay, you got lots of things going on there. And man is really under the laws of nature, which are now not given from God, but given from nature itself, from evolutionism. And those laws are social Darwinism and survival of the fittest. And now we need to put all those things together into a practice that
regulate them, put them into a law.
Right,
I get it now.
Now this becomes, this idealism. Okay, if this is all really true,
Then
we
you
need
gotta
to
do
put
it.
this into
Of course,
practice.
you got to do it. You got to be consistent.
Yeah, and so Haeckel and these guys, the Monistic League, they're going to be the very society that's going to take it the most serious and try to put this into practice, because they're so idealistic about science's abilities, social Darwinism, to create a new eugenic world, that they will actually try to do this.
I just want to interrupt.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking to myself, I'm thinking about Hinduism and some of the varieties of Hinduism. They're literally worshiping the cow.
Right.
They pour the milk on the cow.
Right.
They let rats run rampant all over the temples and all over you can't touch the animals. You gotta, basically the animals are ruling the Hindus. It seems to me they regulate it according to their religion that way. This is a religion.
Now it's with science.
Science, right.
All right. It's scientific law, okay, environmental law.
Yeah.
And Schopenhauer loved the Brahmanism.
Okay,
yeah.
That's where I was going to go. I was going to ask that question.
He was the first philosopher really to go east strongly, that we see in the West.
Oh, boy.
Okay, and so, by the way, where was National Socialism going? They were heading east.
They were, yeah, they did.
So, first of all, they went there philosophically, and it became popular with many German philosophers. They're going Eastern mysticism. And they also got rid of biblical history in the process to do that. Think about it. Okay.
Is this with the higher criticism and so forth?
So they undermine the historical basis for our faith, and then what do they want to do? They want to do that to get back to Eastern mysticism.
So can we say higher criticism created Nazism?
Well, it was one of the. It was one of the original. It was one of the things that helped get us there.
I get it. I'm making the connection.
It's not the only thing, but one of them. Okay. So now they want to put this into practice, and they have lots of philosophers like Schopenhauer, and they have the German higher criticism has destroyed the Bible. God doesn't exist. We have, of course, Ernst Haeckel, who has interpreted Darwin for us, and we have all these things coming together to produce a brave new world through eugenic desires, which actually is a false millennialism. Okay, see, we're gonna arrive at utopia by getting back to nature, by getting back to the social Darwinian laws of evolution, which are progressing, all at the same time. And if we take them seriously, survival of the fittest, we are going to produce a new, strong man. Okay, so this becomes very important to Germany, and they're going to mix it now with social Darwinism, which is really socialism and Darwinism mixed together. Okay, and it's going to be a biological socialism, not a humanistic socialism like was the case with communism.
Hold on just a second. What do you mean by biological socialism? Can you just define it real quick?
Yeah, because Darwin was all about biology, trying to show how biological evolution leads to, changes in evolutionary laws of nature, and this is where things are going. Nature is developing. So biology to Germany was the key to human evolution. Okay, to social Darwinism.
I see.
Now with Marx and with the communists, it's about being a human being, and through economics. So man will progress through economics, through materialism, the development of a world in which there are going to be so many materialistic goodies, thanks to capitalism, that we'll no longer have classes. So that also leads to utopia, a classless utopia based on economics. Okay, with the National Socialism, okay, with the socialism that preceded that, with the nature mysticism, the political mysticism working together, what they're going to do is take biology and also ecology working together, because biology and ecology are just across the halls from each other, okay? And Haeckel was the first, he invented the term ecology in 1866. So he coined the term.
Will you define ecology?
Ecology was, defined by, basically it's a system of the, systema. It's a system of, the world. In terms of classification of the Earth with regard to eco. Bio is life, and eco is going to be more of the environment, in general. So basically, you could define ecology as more sort of the broader biology, really, if you were to sit down and think about it. Okay, so it's more extensive.
Got it.
Okay. And it's more like biology is more specific, ecology is more general. And ecology is like, that's environmentalism, see? And then biology is more the specific connections that show the intertwined, the connections between them.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is, we might have 12-year-olds on here, and I want them to kind of hear somebody like, what is this? And that was a good explanation. That's good.
So the biology and ecology came together, social Darwinism, environmentalism, and what happened under National Socialism is that they developed a doctrine called blood and soil. Blood, that was eugenics, the biology. They're going to clean up the blood of people, and they're going to use the latest science to do that. It's like an early form of transhumanism.
So when you're saying
genetics,
the blood of people, are they talking about the German race found in Austria, Germany? They're not talking about the world, right? Or yes?
Well, they will be the leaders of the world to bring about a new man.
All right.
And it's going to be through Germany, because Germany they viewed as the highest of all people. And the reason why the Germans were the highest of all people is because they believed the Germans were closest to nature, which a lot of people don't understand. When they talk about the master race, it's not because they were like Genesis chapter 1, man is made in God's image and above nature. Hitler criticized that view constantly in his writings. No, it's that Germany is number one. Why? Because they're closest to nature. And they're going to provide a sustainable environmentalism, a sustainable economy. Nazi Germany was...
So they were trying to be the example for all of humanity, is what you're trying to say, through this ecology,
biology, social Darwinism, eugenics.
Like in every way that they thought in their skewed, non-biblical worldview. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be through a form of transhumanism.
Okay.
Instead of the more generalized transhumanism today, it was going to be through the German race. And Germany was going to practice transhumanism, eugenics, politically, socially, by law, by nature, by following nature's laws inside of Germany to produce a new man. And that was leading to utopia. And this is why they talked about the 1,000-year Reich, okay, which is like a false...
they talk about the third kingdom.
Yes.
And can you explain why would they call it a third kingdom and third Reich, or third reign?
Well, that's another issue.
Okay, all right. Maybe
yeah,
that's
yeah. Let's
opposite.
just
We'll
keep
move.
it.
Yeah, we'll keep it on this one. All right,
You know,
go
you've
for
got the Holy Catholic Church and all
Okay,
that kind of
all right.
stuff.
We'll-
They're going to produce a secular political mysticism, a nature mysticism based on biology and politics, and this kingdom will be better than anything we've seen before. First Reich was the Holy Roman Empire. Second Reich, that was only lasted for like, I think, what, 40 years. This is with the guy that starts with the B, you know, and this is a very liberal socialist empire that was produced by, what's his name? Starts with the B. Anyway, sorry. And then that all ended World War I. And then the Third Reich will be a replacement of that. And this is going to be the best.
Wow.
That's what they wanted. And it's more secular because the Second Reich was more Judeo-Christian in the sense that, yeah, even though the historical criticism has undermined, you know, the biblical authority, yet they still believed in God. They still had some respect for Bible. They twisted the Bible, but still it was there. That all ended with World War I. And then after World War I, it becomes much more secular. And what the Nazis will do is mystify that secularity into a new form of nature mysticism. And they'll mix it with science, with biology, with ecology, social Darwinism, transhumanism, and they're now going to want to clean up the blood and also clean up.
So, because you're saying blood and soil.
Yeah.
That's why they're
and
together.
also nature along with it. So we're going to have clean blood and clean soil. This was their plan. Clean blood, that's eugenics. We're going to clean up the world from diseases, especially the German race, through genetics. That means we have to cut off the diseases. So if we have people that are multiplying with all of these diseases like Down syndrome or, you know, whatever they would, of course they call them retarded in those days.
Right.
We need to eliminate that because nature teaches us survival of the fittest. You know, the wolves come in and they clean up nature. They clean out the weak. The weak is what produces diseases. It spreads among the culture. And we should not take care of that. We should actually destroy that to help make a stronger person.
So just, I'm hopefully it's not too big of a rabbit trail, but is this also why they passed laws against homosexual practices or lesbianism? Except for there was from what I remember studying, there was a widespread lesbianism was widespread in homosexual activity, but there was wasn't there this also kind of because of this blood and soil thing, there was something that they were passing laws, from what I remember reading, studying at one point in my life, against homosexual relationships. Is that true? Would this go back to blood? Because they're like, well, this doesn't help society. They're going to be practical Darwinists because this isn't propagating the race. What do you think about? Is there a connection or no?
Let's get back to that later.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
That's another rabbit trail,
Right,
and
all right.
actually, that's really not exactly true. Because,
Okay, all right.
Because Ernst Röhm, he was in charge of the SA. He was a very powerful political leader.
Okay.
And before 1933, he was one of Hitler's favorite, best friends. He was in charge of the SA, and he was a flaming homosexual.
Right, I did. I was aware of that.
And all the people around him were all homosexuals. They all learned that, and including, a lot of people in Germany at that time, including many of the Nazis, who all knows who did what during the war. But World War I, they were practicing homosexuality because that's what men do. Okay,
that's what I heard.
During this time, it was horrible. So Ernst Röhm actually was killed by Hitler, not because he was a homosexual, but because he was starting to say things against the Fuhrer. And one of the things he talked about is that the Fuhrer sits up there on his mountain and doesn't, like he's God, and he was criticizing the Fuhrer's nature worship. Okay, that's another story. Let's get back to that later.
All right.
So the blood and soil doctrine gets mixed up with the T4 that you mentioned. Okay, so they want to clean up the blood because, like a wolf, we need to get rid of the weak in order to make our strong society, our politics strong, our biology strong. If we have a strong biology, then we're going to have strong politics, and we're going to have a strong society. And that means we have to, start cleaning up things. And there's too many people in the sense that there's too many diseased people. And they said the Christians and Jews have given us a worldview that we should take care of the weak. This is wrong. Nietzsche was correct. We need the Superman, the will to power.
Right.
So the will to power, that also, the existentialism gets mixed up with the social Darwinism, so that not only do we have survival of the fittest scientifically based in Darwinism, but also we're going to have the will to power. It's mixed up with Nietzsche's philosophy, the Superman. The Nazis believed they were the Supermen who were going to bring about all the things that Nietzsche talked about. Even though Nietzsche was very critical of the Germans at the time, yet the Nazis loved Nietzsche. Hitler's favorite philosophy was number one, Schopenhauer. He could quote him verbatim.
How about that?
And he learned his anti-Jewish tirade against the Jews, that they hated animals, that they hated, they want to control animals. He learned that from Schopenhauer. And also the Jewish views of nature that Schopenhauer heavily criticized because of Genesis chapter 1. Hitler would say, well, evolution has proved this not to be true now. And this is just a fairy tale. And so, these are all things that Hitler got not only from Schopenhauer, but he got some of it even from Haeckel, even though he didn't like some of the things Haeckel said, because he felt this Haeckel was too nice of a guy. He wasn't mean enough. Okay. It's not because he disagreed with Haeckel's science per se. It's because he was just too nice of a guy. He wasn't wild enough. Okay, he wasn't, he's not close to nature. So there were some distinctions between them, but still, the same tree is there. Now, with regard to the soil, okay, the Nazis also wanted to clean up the soil, and they had all kinds of things connected to conservation farming. Okay, but it kind of also starting to talk about organic farming, environmentalism, also with regard to whole landscapes. How do we take care of entire landscapes, not just like a little nature preserve. The Nazis did actually set aside a lot of nature preserves. I believe they have actually the record setting aside nature preserves.
Hold on, we're looking at evidence of environmentalism right before our very eyes.
Solar panels.
Oh my goodness! Covering these green, beautiful hills.
Yeah,
what a mess.
It looks ugly.
Never mind, you guys can't see it. But
and there's another example of how environmentalism damages the environment. I mean, the windmills are ugly, and the solar panels are ugly. I mean, I'm sorry, they take lots of land, destroy big areas of land.
Then you got to get rid of them when they rot.
Right.
Anyway, go ahead.
And so, they mix that all together, and they're going to clean up nature as well. So you have this transhumanism, genetics, social Darwinism, biology, and also ecology working together. Blood and soil. That was their plan. Clean hereditary, clean hereditary, and also clean environment. So this is how this all came together in a very explosive, dangerous concoction that blew up all of Europe. And I know a lot of people say, look at what California was doing to they were sterilizing, for eugenic purposes. We practice eugenics in America too.
Sure.
They were sterilizing, these people. Okay, and I said, oh yeah, that's not good. Okay, the Nazis were killing people, guys.
Yeah.
They weren't just sterilizing; they were killing them. Yeah. And this is in T4. They were much farther along in the process because of the freedoms of America. The Constitution were protecting us from this type of activity. The freedom and the responsibility went along with that. The lack of socialism prevented social engineering to get that done on a bigger scale.
Can you imagine if the Nazis had the genetic testing that we had today?
Yeah.
Can you even imagine what they would have done with that?
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what this worldview, this ideology, what it would have done. Wow.
Now,
wow.
The other thing that was going on is that Schopenhauer, for example, hated animal experimentation. Okay.
Humans have no problem.
Well, okay, this is where I'm going. Okay.
I want to hear this.
He hated animal experimentation. And he criticized that the Jews have given us this animal experimentation. He said we need to stop it.
Oh my.
Okay. There's two laws that the Nazis did pretty quickly. Actually, one big law. 1933, they passed an animal rights law. For example, and you can sit there and say, well, they weren't serious about it. Okay, well, that's not really true. 1934, my home city, not my home city, but Seattle, Washington, not far from us, awarded Hitler the Animal Rights Humane Award, 1934.
Oh, there we go.
There was some foundation there in Seattle, and they gave the Fuhrer the Animal Rights, award for the world.
Wow.
So he earned that in 1934.
Oh.
Why? Because they passed an animal rights in 1933, and they forbid. Not only did they forbid animal experimentation, but also they forbid Jewish kosher slaughter.
Wow.
Okay, because
So basically, are PETA people Nazis? Are we
Well,
gonna get?
they don't know where these things are coming from,
Right.
and they don't know the history of these wild ideas, the foundations for them, and so
I mean, just
right. I wouldn't call them Nazis because
Well, their ideology comes from it.
But right,
What they're doing with
yes, these ideas are
obviously going back from the Old Testament
Yes.
roots, basically. Right. I'm being facetious.
Yeah, no, I know.
It's just.
but it's a fermentation of bad ideas that at some point is going to create something bad, unless something happens just to stop some of these things. So the Nazis, by the way, many of the leading Nazis were vegetarians. And a lot of people,
you had mentioned that. That was
right.
interesting to me.
Hitler supposedly was was a vegetarian, and people deny this. They sit there and fight this, but he may have gone out to state dinners once in a while, and he may have had some meat because of what's going on. But for the most part, he tried to be a vegetarian. Rudolf Hess was a very serious vegetarian. He was a guy that was even. He was into biodynamic farming. He was into vegetarianism. He was into organicism very strongly. And he was basically second in command for a while. I mean, he was a strange guy, but still he was high up in the Third Reich. And by the way, a lot of people don't like to admit this, but Rudolf Hess, he was really the connection between the Fuhrer and the people. Okay, after the Fuhrer lost Hess and he went to England, Hitler lost his connection to the people. And Rudolf Hess was that connection. And Rudolf Hess was very, very green. He was an environmentalist, very strong.
I have a question.
Himmler was also a vegetarian, okay? So was Goebbels, okay? They were all vegetarians. Goering was not. He loved hunting, but that's another story.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I have a question about American history tied in with this whole ideology. So you have Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood.
Yep.
Would she have understood the doctrine of blood and soil? Because obviously she decided to get rid of the lesser races, and in her view, if she's following Darwinism, by getting rid of black and brown babies. I mean, that was the entire thing, is to murder these that she, whatever she was thinking.
Right.
Can you just kind of give a little connection there?
I have not read anything from Sanger, but I would assume that yes, she understood the principles. And Hitler called America a mongrel nation. Okay.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Well, from everything I've read from Margaret Sanger, and then history from her, I mean, it's exactly this eugenics, good gene kind of thing.
Right.
Get rid of the, and we're going to help the people by putting the clinics in the middle of, where the brown people are. I mean, it's the most racist thing it's ridiculous.
Right, I know.
And nobody understands the roots that go back to this for sure. Anything else you want to? We got an hour and 13 minutes in, which isn't too long, but if you got some things that's to close up with, let's try to do it.
In 1934, the Nazis they passed the Sustainable Forestry Act. Now, as the war kicked into high gear, they had to sacrifice some of their. Later on in the 1930s, they had to sacrifice some of their plans.
Pretty much.
And of course, the four-year plan, they had to ramp up, production.
Sure.
However,
a
lot of people don't realize the 4-year plan was supposed to be a sustainable plan.
No, I wouldn't.
But it was a fantasy. Okay, sustainability is a fantasy. Okay, and the Nazis were not able to actually carry it into practice. We can't even do it today either. So it's just foolish idealism. It will never work.
Oh boy, you're going to make some people mad with that.
Right.
I think, no, I'm serious. You got to talk. I want to hear you explain and unpack why sustainability is a fantasy.
Well, the Nazis are the originators of it.
All right. This
okay, and they broke all their own sustainability rules in order because it is not possible to do. So, for example, green building. That Albert Speer, he's one of the original gurus of what we call green building today. He was Hitler's architect. The guy that existed before him, he died in a plane crash in 1941. His name starts with an H. Fritz Todt. Okay, he was, again, a green builder. He loved nature, the same kind of a guy. Speer and him basically believed the same in terms of the worldview. They were the originators of what we call green building. Okay, especially Todt. I mean, even with regard to the Autobahn. Okay, they were trying to blend in nature, the highways with with nature. Okay, this was part of their plan. People debate that, but there was supposedly a sustainability between road building and nature. Okay, and they had rules and regulations to try to regulate that. And even the 4-year plan that they came up with, all signed by the leading Nazis, including the architect Speer, and I think even Fritz Todt's name may be on that as well. They signed a document saying that we are going to have master plan communities, and we are going to reverse all of this unplanned stuff that has created all kinds of problems with regard to nature, pollution. We're going to plan cities correctly. And by the way, a lot of people don't realize when Hitler was going east to Poland, they had big environmental master plan communities connected to that. They were going to get rid of people, get rid of the big cities, turn Poland, Ukraine, Belarus into big farms, aristocratic farms for Nazis, where they could enjoy all of the rights of land.
Why have I never heard that?
Because they don't talk about it.
No, I've never heard this.
Yes.
No, seriously.
Yes.
That's insane.
So they would have master plan communities inside of the, like a city.
Sure.
All around it, you're going to have nature all around it.
Interesting.
They were going to destroy cities. I mean, part of the reason why they were going to get rid of St. Petersburg. Okay, and, they laid siege to it, and they were going to get rid of these Soviet humanistic cities, and we're going to have our own master plan communities with respect for sustainability. So they could not do that in Germany because the war demands. So everything passes over to Himmler in the East during the war. And he was a very strong environmentalist too. A lot of people don't know. I mean, he was, even both Hitler, by the way, people say, well, look at Goering. He can't be an environmentalist. He was shooting animals. Well, look at, there's a lot of hunters that are environmentalists. The man that, what's his name? Aldo Leopold. He was a hunter. Okay, he loved, basically he's the father of what we call also sustainability, but he learned it from the Germans, okay, because he went to Germany in 1935 and he complimented what the Nazis were doing with regard to environmental practices. And so Aldo Leopold is kind of what we call the father of deep ecology. He learned it from the Nazis. And one of the comments that he makes in I think the Sand County Almanac, a famous book he wrote, Environmentalism, he said, we have to stop the Abrahamic concept of the land.
There we go again.
Where did he get that?
Sheesh.
He got that from Germany.
Yeah,
from the
I
Nazis.
get it. I see the connection.
So all those things were all there. And Goering he had all kinds of things that, some of the things Leopold criticized that Goering was doing. He had hunting laws, so he was trying to bring back animals. He was trying to, of course, he'd use them for shooting purposes too, because he loved hunting. But he was like the aristocrat, like the rich guy that has his own land, estate, and basically I have my home, and then everything else is nature, and I get to shoot my animals, my own property. I mean, that's kind of what the old German, even European aristocracy used to do. The king owned the forest, and you can't do anything on it.
That's right.
Okay. So that was Hermann Goering, and he passed sustainable forestry ideas. Also, the 1935, they call it the Reich Nature Protection Act. This is really the beginning of what we call modern environmentalism, in the sense that now we protect whole landscapes, not just nature reserves, but private property.
So this is talking about like you can't cut down a tree.
Well, no.
No. Like what are we talking about?
No, what we're talking about here is that environmentalism now will regulate your private property now too.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So they would say, like, on your property, you've got to plant 20 trees because there's only one now, because you got this amount of land, or you can't cut down that tree without getting permission, or you got to do this thing or that thing.
There would be regulations,
whatever the things are.
Yeah, on your own private property. So that's 1935.
No, that's horrible.
And so that began under the auspices of National Socialism. They're going to control the land, okay, through regulation. And so that was 1935. And so by 1935, the greenest regime in the history of the world, in the history of the planet, at that time was Nazi Germany. They were the vanguard of bringing about these ecological ideals, okay, idealism, and let's put them into practice because we believe these things are actually true. Okay, so they actually did a lot of that, and that provided the basis for today what we call environmentalism.
So wait, I'm just
that bridge,
I'm
between
going to be a little snarky. And what about these Paris Nazi Accords? Look, that's all kind of seems like there's a connection there. What do they call it? Peace Accord. It's not a peace. I mean, this whole thing that Trump decided, hey, we're going to get out of this.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
well,
I'm joking around.
Okay, well, we can talk about the 1,000-year Reich, a false millennialism.
Sure.
Okay, well,
they're trying to recreate this again.
What are they trying to do? They're trying to stop mainly the global warming apocalypse.
Right.
It's a false apocalypse.
Yeah.
Okay, the planet is heating up. Okay, well, in the Bible, we've got God's going to torch up the planet because of man's sin. Okay, so they've secularized that into a global warming get eschatology. And so you have the transhumanism, that's a false eschatology. If we get rid of people, we'll get rid of the carbon, stop the carbon, and then we can, the carbon pollution, so to speak, which, by the way, carbon's not a pollutant, but that's another story. So this will bring us about a utopia in the future, and it'll stop the global warming apocalypse. So they have false eschatology in their minds.
Right.
They've taken it from the Bible.
It's against Tower Babel.
Right, secularized it.
Yeah.
There's no resurrection. So what we have to do is have a super legalism to get us to utopia. That means man will have to be severely disciplined to bring about this utopia. And this is why the Nazis were all about discipline. Okay, it's a part of the same thing. The new man is coming.
Yeah, it's
the
attractive,
Superman.
Right. You've got the suit, you got the symbol, you got the marching, you got the rules, the pay. Yeah, I get it.
And also, there's a big story with regard to global warming, the concern about carbon. Now, you can root this also with one of the original weathermen who worked for the Nazi Luftwaffe. He was there complaining about during the 1930s, it's very warm. And they were complaining about, again, too many people, the cities, causing pollution. This is what's contributing now to the warming of the planet. And so this was a big concern in the 1930s. And he was not a Nazi per se, but he was a weatherman for the Luftwaffe.
Right.
And that guy he writes many of the most important global warming papers between even the early 1930s, even 1930s all the way to 1980s. And he received a award from Germany for being the most important, founding father of global warming.
Wow.
The concern for it.
How about that?
And he has Nazi connections. Okay.
Wow.
The other guy that really made global warming popular was a guy named Gunther Schwab, and he was an Austrian Nazi. And he, a lot of the Nazis, not a lot, but some of the Nazis, especially out of the SS, they were anti-nuclear, which was starting to get going, and they just saw the destruction of Japan. And of course, Germany was bombed into oblivion. They saw all the destruction. And so this actually made the environmental movement in Germany post-World War II even more frantic than they were before, because they saw what the industrial warfare did to their nation. So they became actually really almost nuts, And Gunther Schwab was one of them. He talked about global warming in the 1950s, wrote a book that was very popular, highly read by many people throughout Europe. It was called, what was the name of that book? Dancing with the Devil. There you have our Judeo-Christian false secular idea, And then Dancing with the Devil was this false industrialism, especially the American variety, which the Nazis were all against. It's unsustainable. It's out of control. It's a mongrel nation. Too much freedom. We have to control.
I just find this so fascinating.
Right.
So again, I'm a little facetious, but if you are a global warming alarmist, you're pretty much getting that from Nazism. Well, it's not scientifically based. I mean, we know that 100%.
I would say it passed through National Socialism. It really
It
goes
passed
back to
through.
the German Academy.
Right, that's what I'm trying. Oh, it's going back
The
through this whole
1800s,
thing.
1700s, and the German Academy eventually produced National Socialism, which a lot of people aren't talking. It was one of the forks.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and if we don't watch out, we're going to produce another fork, and we may be close to that. I mean, maybe some of the things going on now may be slowing it down, but still.
It's just interesting.
Yeah.
All of these evils,
Yeah.
all of these really unscientific and you can't even experiment to prove these things in a scientific way. It all goes back to this crazy ideology, actually going back, like you said at the very beginning, Old Testament.
Yes.
Worship of nature.
Right.
It's interesting.
Well, you can also
denying the
you can
Christian
also
worldview.
show, okay, for example, the trains, okay, that the Jews were placed on that went to
Yeah.
the camps
Sure.
in Poland. The Nazis built these death camps in Poland, and they used them. And the people that ran those death camps were T4 experts, and people don't know that. But those guys were sent to euthanize the Jews. That's how they looked at it. We're euthanizing. We're cleaning up the blood.
Yeah.
Just like
Doing the world a favor. Is
yeah,
what they
just
thought. They thought that.
and they cleansed it,
Sheesh.
justified it,
Horrible.
and we're cleaning up the blood. We're cleaning up our disease in our country. And so T4 euthanasia experts were the guys who built the death camps.
So T was the tricycline, whatever gas, whatever. I forgot what it standed for. Some kind of a chemical that I remember. But anyway, but those are the guys.
Well, I know that Cyclone B was used in.
But there, I forgot what
in
the T
Auschwitz.
was. I'm trying to remember.
There's
what
probably
the
some
T-
other one.
Some other.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
That's the one that's most popular
Right,
that I
right.
remember
Yeah.
in mind. But yeah, they used it to and so later on they used carbon monoxide at the first, and then they started using pesticides.
I see.
That was used for rats, things like that. They used them on people. Now that's another interesting story, because on the same trains in which the Nazis were loading up Jews, full of cattle cars full of Jews, they also had animals on those same trains. And thanks to the Nazi animal rights laws, the animals did pretty good. They were taken care of.
So they watered them.
Oh yeah,
they
all
took
kinds of
care
rules
them
and
all.
regulations,
Yeah.
what to do with the animals on the same
Boy,
trains.
it's just like today.
Animals were taken good care of. And how many Jews can fit into a cattle car
They just
going to
didn't
their
matter.
death? One more.
Oh man.
No,
it just
nothing.
reminds me of these pro murdering babies in the womb. They'll cry over an eagle. They'll cry over a cougar.
Right.
They'll cry over a beaver dam, but they'll just murder any baby, no matter in and out of the womb.
Yeah. No, it's really these false justifications that people don't stop and think about, because they're not seriously thinking biblically. They
It's
don't.
demonic.
Yeah.
It's absolutely so demonic. Doctrines of demons.
And so that was all connected to the Holocaust. I mean, the
Yeah.
Jewish people were
Yeah.
considered to be unnatural.
Right.
They're against nature. They're against social Darwinism, transhumanism. They're interfering with our plans to progress. And so they come up with a plan to kill the Jews.
I'm sorry, we're going long, but you just made me think of something that's really important. There has been the last couple years this kind of resurgence to blame Martin Luther for the Holocaust. And from what you just explained, I didn't hear a Christian theological reason for, like if you read anything from Martin Luther, he didn't have nice things to say later on, that's for sure. But it wasn't blood and soil doctrine.
Right.
So I almost feel like people are trying to pin, let's just make the Lutheran Church look bad.
Right.
If Martin Luther wrote it, forget it, because he wrote a treaty against the Jews. But that doesn't seem like there's any connection at all to reality. What actually happened with what would you say on that? Because this is a hot topic.
Yeah, people get upset with me on this too, but okay. But
I'm just
Martin
curious.
Luther, he loved the Jews at the beginning.
Right.
And it was only as they rejected the gospel that he got angry with them. And yeah, he got cantankerous with a lot of people at the end of his day.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was lambasting anybody that was against him. That's true.
So
but anyway, yeah.
And yes, the Nazis used that as an excuse. Okay, but with the Holocaust did not
Yeah.
occur until the world had become mostly secularized by.
Well,
the
that's
night-
what it seems
So-
like to me.
Which is what my
Yeah.
book is trying to
Yeah.
explain.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
with Martin Luther and the Catholic Church,
Sure.
what you have is pogroms.
Yeah.
Yes, that's not good. It's bad. Okay, however, the Holocaust was much, much worse.
Yeah, so it just to me, like I've been to Yad Vashem, so have you, and they do talk about. I mean, I don't remember seeing any of this stuff in Yad Vashem, leading to the Holocaust. I don't remember the way you're describing
Well,
it,
okay.
but I do remember when you walk in on the right hand side, they have like this Christian that was anti-Jewish,
Sure.
Semitic,
Right.
kind of as a impetus to
Right.
do what they did. I see more of that in my mind. I was just there last year. So is there anything about what you're just describing about this blood and soil doctrine that the Jewish people, and specifically the nation of Israel, can recognize today as the root?
Well, I dropped off my book at Yad Vashem.
Okay.
That's all I can tell you. However, I will say one thing more. I went to the Holocaust seminar at Yad Vashem. I was invited.
Okay.
And, very interesting. And yes, they did talk about the Christian anti-Semitism,
Sure.
but they also recognize there's lots of Christians that are not against them, too.
Of course.
So they,
of course.
And
I
they
mean, my
acknowledge that.
goodness.
We had one guy, one professor, his name is Rafi Vago,
Okay.
came into our class.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, he said the destruction of the Jews was primarily ecological.
So somebody actually was.
Yeah.
They're catching on.
And how he began his discussion was he showed everybody a postcard, beautiful idyllic postcard in Austria, the church, and beautiful flowers
Family
in the foreground.
of like blonde-haired kids.
There's a beautiful nature. There's some ducks in the background, the mountains, beautiful white mountains, And he walked around Austria, Germany. I'm not sure exactly what it was, and he would talk to Austrians, and he said, "Now, does a Jew belong in this picture?"
Wow.
And they all said no.
What in the world?
And so this is what started this conversation.
How about that?
And I tried to talk to him a little bit.
Sure.
But then he's such a guy that's on demand that he came in, taught a class, and left.
Well, he saw the connection.
But no,
I mean,
he
got
saw it,
He got
and
it.
right. And
So there are
he
folks
did
that are
not
talking
dig
about
deeply
it.
like I just did.
Yeah,
okay, but
sure.
he recognizes there's something here, and he was one of the speakers, one of the main speakers, and so some of these guys are starting to see this.
Well, I was just going to I outright reject the notion this has anything to do with Christianity, and I don't know. People shouldn't write stupid things. Luther probably should have. He should have never done that.
I know.
My goodness, because ideas do matter. It does
I
influence
know.
people.
It's not
But-
biblical Christianity.
Right. The root though is this non-biblical worldview, starting with denying the creation cultural mandate, and that humans are made in the image of God.
Right. No,
just go to the root.
That
I mean,
is
that's it.
yes. This is what my book is all about, explaining that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
I want people to find it. How can people find a book on that? Is it on Amazon?
Yeah, you can
order
find
it?
Amazon Nazi Ecology, R. Mark Musser, Nazi Ecology, R. Mark Musser, and that's the name of the book.
Well, I wish I was more informed on these issues. I would have had better questions. I tried to do the best I can. Thank you for. We just spent an hour and 30 minutes talking about this. We're in Armenia, guys, country of Armenia. This is a
great time working with Jacob and Agarak on the Iranian border with some mission work. And thank you.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Thanks for the interview.
Yeah, it's been fun. All right. Well, we'll have fun with this one.